now come take me out for a ride. Take me round in a taxi cab for two.
Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And you might remember that late this summer we picked up a bar find, a Peugeot from 1929. Now let me tell you a few things about this vehicle and what we're going to do about it. So this Peugeot was built in 1929. They started building the 190S model as of 1925 until 1931. So this little car here is almost 100 years old. And it's in a remarkable good state. I think some people have worked on it before me, so I don't know what the overall state is of it, especially not the engine, but we're going to give it a try and see what we can do about it to crank it up in this video. Now the engine itself is a very small engine. It's only a 695cc engine. It's cast iron 4-cylinder, and it's commonly referred to as the CV5, so developing about 14 horsepower. I'm going to try to crank up this engine for the very first time. Now I don't know what state it is in, I don't know what they've done to it. It looks pretty clean, but let's give it a try. We're going to start, of course, with checking all the fluids. Then we're going to check some compression. We're going to try to check the ignition, and the ignition is a bit special on this car. And then we're going to fill it up with some gas and see if we can get it cranked up. I don't know if it's going to work or not. It actually might be for the next video. I don't know at this moment in time. I haven't tried it, so this is the first time we're going to do this. So you are the witness of starting up a CV5 for the very first time after God knows how long. So let's have a look underneath the bonnet. So let's have a look at the magic power source. And here it is. So I'm going to remove the bonnet so we can have a better view on the engine and get it ready for its first startup. So let's see if we can remove this bonnet. This is really a very small engine, so let's have a look at all the different elements that make up that engine, because it's a bit different than what we are used to today. The first thing that I noticed when I looked on this engine is that it doesn't have a standard ignition system. We have the distributor, we've got the 4 spark plugs, or leads going to the spark plugs, and in the central point we have what we call normally the high tension pickup, which is coming from the high tension coil. But in this case it's connected to this metal cylinder here. Now this metal cylinder here is what we call the magneto, and a magneto is a self-supporting ignition system, so you don't need a battery to run your ignition system. It generates the power all by itself based on a primary and a secondary winding, and then a spinning coil inside surrounded by magnets. I might have a separate video actually on how the magneto is working, especially that I don't know if this is working. Now I have to say, this is a long time ago I have worked on a magneto. So inside the distributor cap we'll certainly find the breaker points. So let's have a look how the breaker points look like. We have the standard rotor, let's take that off, and underneath we actually have the breaker points, and they still look in a reasonable condition. I will actually clean them up a bit with some very fine abrasive paper just to make sure they make a good contact. Now the magneto typically never fails, however the magnet inside can actually become weak, and then you have to re-energize that magneto. Alright, let me put this back together. And the distributor actually has the cylinders number on it, 1, 4, 3 and 2. So this must be a 1, 3, 2, 4, or maybe it's a 1, 4, 2, 3. I don't know which direction the rotor turns, but we'll find that out very soon. Now I don't know what kind of firing order this engine has, but if I look on the distributor I see cylinder number 1 being marked, and if I follow that cable, the high tension lead, then it's coming out here and it goes to the cylinder which is towards the passengers or the driver's compartment or the cockpit. And typically cylinder number 1, I would expect that it would be towards the radiator. But then again, this is an old engine, so maybe that's how they looked at it at those days. Then I see the second lead, which is actually cylinder number 4, right? So this is weird because this shouldn't be number 4. This is actually either number 2 or number 3. I think this is cabled up completely wrong, to be very honest. And then cylinder number 1, what I would expect to be number 1 close to the radiator, is actually plugged into cylinder number 2. So I think this is probably totally wrong, cabled up. So somebody just put it together just for the sake of putting it together. On top of the motor we actually find the dynamo, and this says it's a 6 volts dynamo, and it's at the same, it's been driven by this pulley and the belt by the crankshaft, and there's a little fan blade here. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of cute actually. And greasing nipple. So nothing is connected to it, as you can see. So there's no cabling on this car, so I don't expect this to work. But I don't need it at this moment in time because we have a magneto. Okay, I think somebody replaced the belt already, so that's a good thing. So now let's have a look at the radiator itself, what state that is in. I think overall the radiator looks in a pretty good state. I don't know if it's going to leak or not. And on the top we can fill it up with a copper big nut. I like these kind of things. I mean, they really built cars nice in the old days. Look at this. Right, let's see if there's any liquid in it. Well, that turns to be empty. So we'll have to fill it up and see what happens. But first of all, before we do so, let's look on the maze on the radiator. That looks quite alright. There's a few little parts there that are a little bit damaged, but overall the maze looks pretty good. The hose looks like it's been replaced recently, so that's good. There's another hose in the bottom that looks good as well. So I think we pretty are quite alright to fill up the engine with some cooling liquid. Funny thing is, this engine doesn't have a water pump, so it purely relies on circulation of the heat through the engine by itself. I'm going to be using a modern cooling liquid from minus 25 degrees centigrade to 105 positive degrees centigrade, and it's at the same time protecting the engine from corrosion. So let's hope it doesn't leak. So let's check if we see anything dripping out of it anywhere. So far, no drips. It is a very small engine and it does take a lot of cooling liquid, but it has a huge radiator, and I think the large radiator compensates actually for the lack of a water pump. And that's it. So we're good. So far I haven't seen any leaks, so I'm going to clean up the part that I spilled, and then we'll keep an eye on it, what happens. I'm going to blow it dry so I can see if I have leaks or not. And the next step is to check the engine oil. So believe it or not, but there's even a dipstick, and it seems like there is a lot of oil still in it. In fact, it's a bit overfilled. So I'm going to leave that oil in there. It looks very clean. So we have checked the radiator, the cooling system, and there's no leaks so far, so that's a good point. It doesn't leak on the engine either, so I'm quite happy with that. We have quickly checked on the ignition system. We know it's a magneto, but we haven't verified anything if it's going to work or not. We have a bit of a confusion on the spark plugs, but we'll figure that out very soon. We haven't looked on the fuel system yet, and the gas tank is over here. There's no gas in it, so we still have to fill that up. And we haven't looked on the carburetor yet. But before I do all that, I'm going to take out the spark plugs and have a quick visual inspection inside the spark plug holes to check the cylinders. Unfortunately, on this engine you can't, because the valves are in the way. It's a very weird construct. You have the cylinder, and then on the side you have the valve sitting, not on top of the cylinder or the piston. So I'm going to be looking at intake and exhaust valves on this engine. But we'll do that, and we'll have a look on how they look like. And once we've done that, I'm going to try to rotate it and see if I can get the oil to circulate, if I can see if the engine is actually turning over. But I'm not going to crank it yet. That's not going to happen right now. So, let me remove the spark plugs. As I said before, I don't really care for the moment in time what the sequence of these spark plugs are, because I think it's been malfitted anyway. Unless I'm totally wrong, of course. That was quite loose. There we go. It's kind of an interesting spark plug, the shape of that. I haven't seen those before. And in fact, they even look like brand new, like they haven't been used at all on this engine. So in other words, this engine did never run after they put it back together. So here it is, the 4 cylinders. And if you look inside in these holes, you might actually see the valve sitting all the way in there. So the spark plug is sitting right on top. Normally you would see the valve sitting upwards, but here they're sitting downwards. So that's a bit of a different design. So let us have a closer look on these valves, how they look like. And for that one I'm going to use my endoscope. And I think overall they are not in a bad shape. So let me go inside and you will see the valves there. So I think they are looking quite alright. Go to the next cylinder. See, one valve is actually open. Of course they've been sitting there for a while, I can see that. But I think we still might have some compression. Bit of rust there, but that's okay. Alright, and then the last one. I'm going to try to crank the engine slowly and see if the valves are moving. And I can actually rotate the engine, which is good. An engine that has been sitting still for a long time, I tend to use WD-40 and spray it inside the cylinders and let it soak there for a while, and then I start cranking it over. Alright. Now in this case, the cylinders, or the pistons are right there, and the spark plugs are offset. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to spray it inside. But with this flexible hose I might be able to do that. So I'm just going to spray that a little bit in it, not too much. So I'm going to crank over that engine very slowly. And it goes, in fact, very smooth. So that's a good sign. And just in case you haven't spotted it, there is a starter ring right here, you see that? But I don't think there is a starter on this car. The other thing you might have noticed is that there's no gearbox here at all. You know, this is the flywheel, and that's a straight shaft all the way down to the back of the car, because the gearbox is at the rear. So let me rotate this a few times. This is going quite smoothly, so that's a good sign. Do it a couple more times so I can start pumping around the oil. The next thing up is to do a little compression test. Now, I don't expect a lot of compression on this engine, but we'll check every cylinder and see what it gives us. All right. So we have about 4 kilograms. So that's not too bad. I think that's alright. So let me check all the others and then we'll see. I have checked all 4 the cylinders and they all are around 3.5 to 4 kilograms by me manually swinging over that handle on the engine without the carburetor being fully open. So I know I have compression on all 4 cylinders. The engine is turning over quite smoothly. So now the next step is actually to look at the fuel system, fill up the gas tank and check the carburetor. And then the last thing we're going to do is to check the ignition system, and I think that's where the problem will be. The carburetor is right here, and it is a Zenith built in France, Lyon. It has a serial number on it and it has a type number on it. is an adjustment screw, most likely for idle, I'm not sure. But on the top here you have the choke, and all the way below we have the gas throttle. In those days it didn't seem to be the case that you had an air filter. So basically you could open this up and then you close this, and this is the only protection you actually had. There was no air filter whatsoever, so air would get into the sides here. I'm just going to leave that open for now. You also see that the fuel is coming in over this chrome pipe straight from the gas tank. There is, by the way, no fuel pump, and that's because the gas tank is high up, so it all relies on gravity. And on all the way on the bottom we have actually a removal part, so I can actually remove this bottom pot here, and I'll actually will do that to see what the situation is, and then we'll fill up the gas tank. So let me try to open this up. I don't know if you will be able to see it. I should be able to see it. That's the good thing about all these. That's the good thing about all this old stuff, you know. Everything is made for you to repair it, and here it is. So this is the whole bottom part of the carburetor. I'm just going to have a quick look on it to see how it is. So fuel will be coming in from the top here through an internal channel in the top of this cast, and then it will hit the needle valve, which is sitting right here on the bottom. I don't know if you can see it, and then it will fill up actually the float chamber, which I have right here, and the float will then come up and it will block the fuel. So it looks all very clean. So let me put this back, and then we'll see if we get actually fuel coming into it. So the fuel tank is sitting all the way high up in the engine compartment, just in front of the passengers. That's quite interesting. Nevertheless, there is no fuel pump, as I stated before, because it is actually all fed by gravity. So let's see what we have inside the fuel tank, if there's any fuel in it. And that looks to me pretty empty. So I'm going to have a little peep inside how clean it is, and it's very clean. So somebody must have cleaned it out before. So I'm quite happy about that. I'm going to fill up the fuel tank, and the only issue is that modern fuels are not all that good for old engines. Now the old engines, they relied on the lead that was added to the fuel, and that would actually grease the valve seats and the valves themselves. And if you run with modern fuel on an old engine, most likely you're going to burn the valve seats and you're going to damage the valves. And that's because there is no more lead into modern gasoline. And that's why I'm always using a lead substitute. And that helps protecting these valves and these valve seats. So let me mix that up. And there's a very specific mix you need to do. And then we'll fill up the gas tank. So I'm going to prepare about 10 liters. So I have to get it up to that mark there. And you just need to squeeze that. And there we go. We are at 10 liters now. So that should be enough. And now I can fill up my gas tank. Alright, so that's the first 5 liters. So now I'm going to open up the valve on the fuel tank and let the fuel get into the carburetor and see if it actually is coming in. So let's see if we get some fuel coming into the carburetor, and I put a little pot here, so that's where the fuel needle is, and then we'll see if it fills up or not. Yeah, that comes out nicely, so I'm happy with that. So now it's time to put the fuel bowl back into place. That should be all that hard. It's so nice the way they built these cars in the old days. Alright, and that should be it. I'm not going to make it too tight. Let me open up that fuel valve again and see if we get a leak. That seems to be alright. Oh, it's leaking, it's dripping. Oh, this might not be tight, or there may be no proper seal on it. or it's actually coming through a missing seal that we have here. So I need to check that out. Okay, so we have to create first of all a seal. So we got two problems on the carburetor, a leak here, and we had a leak in between the housing and the flow chamber. So the flow chamber is easy because there was no seal. I guess this is probably just the same issue. Well, see that? It's just the nut that wasn't bolted down properly. That's all there is to it. Now that should be sealed. So for the bottom part of the carburetor, or the housing for the float, there's no seal on it, so it can leak through that, although normally it shouldn't, because the float shouldn't come up that high. But I've never seen a float chamber without a seal on, so I'm going to make a seal. I'm just going to use a piece of paper first, put it on there, and then I'm going to cut out a seal. So let me do that. There isn't a lot to this, so I'm just going to put this old piece of paper onto there and then just punch it through. There we go. And I just wrap it around with my fingers because they're a bit dirty. So that's the good thing about dirty fingers, right? So you can wrap this around and then see where that seal is supposed to be. And then I can actually cut it out. That's how simple that is. So this is a roll of seal. You can buy this by the running yard or the running meter if you want. And I already cut off a small piece, so now I'm just gonna mark this where I need to cut this, and then we'll cut it with a cutter. So I've finally cut the seal, so I can now install things together, and that should just be fine. So let us put it back onto the carburetor and see what happens. Let's see if we still have a fuel leak now. I don't think we should, but you never know. So let me open up the fuel valve and then we'll see. And I think this is looking a lot better now. At least I see no more fuel coming out. Oh, it's still a bit wet here, but there's no more coming out. So that's good. So the fuel system is now checked and the carburetor is filled up with fuel. Now the next step is the ignition system. Now the ignition is going to be most likely the troublemaker because the magneto might not work. If that is the case, I'm probably going to swap it out, actually leave it in place, but bypass it with a coil and a battery. But we'll see, because at the end I still want to keep the magneto working and I might have to repair it, but that's not going to be for this video obviously. But the main issue is I don't even know the firing order on this motor. And I don't even know where cylinder number 1 is. It doesn't look to be like closest to the radiator, it just looks the opposite. And that might very well be the case. But we can find that out by looking at the valves, how the valves are being operated. So I need just to follow the intake valve and then I can tell what the sequence will be. So let's first of all have a look on the distributor, what that says. Now on top of the magneto I actually have the distributor, and if I look closely on the distributor I can see markings on it. I can see a 4, a 1, a 3 and a 2. So I don't know exactly how the distributor rotates, but we'll find that out soon. But I expect it's going to rotate clockwise. So in fact the firing order would be 1, 3, which is kind of normal, 2 and 4. Now typically I would have expected a 4 and a 2, so I would have thought a 1342 and not a 1324 as this would indicate. I don't know if these numbers are correct. I don't even know if this distributor head is still the original one. So let's remove the cap and see in which direction it rotates. So let me rotate the engine in its normal direction and see what happens. So now I can see that the rotor is rotating clockwise, so that firing order must be okay then. So based on the markings on the distributor, I believe this engine is a 1324. It's a bit awkward, but again, this car is a bit strange. So now let's check where cylinder number 1 is, because we need to line that up. And now the ultimate question is, where is cylinder number 1? Is it the one facing the radiator, or is it the one facing the passenger side? Now my common sense would say normally it's facing the radiator, that's the standard. But this car is far from standard. So what I've done is I actually marked the valves inside. I can look through the holes of the spark plugs, and then I can see the valves. And this is an outlet, an inlet, inlet, outlet, outlet, inlet, inlet, outlet. So now I will rotate the crankshaft and see what the valves are doing. And that way I can double check what the firing order is. Now this is going to be a little bit hard to show you exactly what I mean. So I'm going to rotate the motor in the direction it's normally running, and I'm going to check. So I'm going to start assuming that this is my cylinder number 1. So the valve on the right hand side, or your left hand side, is my outlet valve, and the other one is my inlet. I can see that the inlet is now slightly open. Now it is actually closing, and now that means I actually have compression. So if I was to check on my distributor now, I should be nearing actually my cylinder number 1 position of my rotor arm, and I'm just doing that. Unfortunately you can't see it while I'm doing this, and I think I'm almost there. Now let me check where the piston is. Now it's a bit hard to check where the piston is because the piston is not right underneath the spark plug, it's a bit on the side. But I can feel it's now topped at center. So let's check. So I see my cylinder number 1 having an inlet being opening up. I should now have compression. Cylinder number 3 is actually closing up, or actually opening up the inlet valve. Now my pointer on my distributor is very near to position cylinder number 1. So that must be cylinder number 1, and this is now my next cylinder, which is cylinder number 3, which is having the intake valve open. So it's at the end of its intake stroke, and now that's closing the valve on cylinder number 3, because now I'm going to get compression, and my pointer on my distributor is now actually pointing to cylinder number 3, which is good. Now the next one that should now start to open up and having an intake is cylinder number 2, which is this one, and I can see this valve is going open. You see, that's my intake right here, and the valve opens up, it's finished, and now I get my compression. So in essence, yeah, this is working. This is how it's supposed to be. So I'm going to try to rig it up that way. So now that I know the firing order, I need to check if my gap on my breaker points is okay, and for that I'm going to clean it. I'm going to set it to 0.3 mil. That's a typical size, I'm not sure what it is. And then I have to be able to adjust the advance on this, and this is a bit more tricky, I think. I have no idea on how that is done. I haven't seen any markers. There may be markers maybe over here, I don't know, we need to check. I see a little stripe there, but I think adjusting the advance on this is by just rotating the magneto. You see, if I rotate it, how my axle here is moving. See? Have a look here, right? See how that moves? So I think this is the adjustment for my advance. So I will have to figure that out, where that should be. So let's check the breaker points if there's no short. So I'm going to connect it on the ground and on the output, and then I rotate the crankshaft. Now no contact, so they open up. That's good. They stay open, and now they should close. So that's good. These points are working and they do it at more or less at the right spot. All I'm going to do now is clean them up a little bit with abrasive paper so they make good contact. And then I'm going to try to find the top dead center of cylinder number 1 and then try to offset it with about 4 to 5, 6 degrees static timing. Now for the breaker points, I'm going to clean them up with some very fine abrasive paper, making sure that they are actually in a closed position. In fact, they are not closed right now, they are in an open position, so let me move the crankshaft until they are really closed. Now they are closed, and I'm going to put it in there and just pull it a few times. Now I'm going to clean those contact points with a little piece of paper and some acetone on it. So make sure that they are not greased anymore, because that's the last thing you want, to have greasy contact points. And you certainly don't want to have an explosion, so because they will arc, so I'm going to clean them right. So now comes the moment of truth, isn't it? Let me put back the distributor head, the rotor itself. I cleaned it up as well a little bit, and inside this hood everything looks quite alright, so they're not really in a bad shape at all. So let me put this up there, and then we're going to give it a try and see if we even get a spark. Whoops, that was why. It is keyed, so alright, so now I need to move this over and connect this cable to the magneto and see if we're gonna get a spark or not. So let's try the magneto and see if it works. So what I've done is I took the output of the high tension of the magneto that normally goes to the top of the distributor, but then I placed it straight to the spark plug, and then I pinched the spark plug in place so it makes a good ground. So let's see what the spark plug does, if I'm going to get a spark or not. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can actually see it. So let me remove the light so we can actually see the sparks, if there are any sparks at all. Alright, so let me swing that motor around. And hopefully you should be seeing some sparks. I don't know if you saw it, but I saw some sparks, very faint. I don't know if this is going to work, and the reason why these sparks are so faint is most likely because of the magnetism of the permanent magnet in the magneto, which has now been faded away over all these years. So maybe I have to get it re-energized, or magnetized I should say, but I can't do this right now. I'm still going to try to crank it up and see if we can. So the first thing now is to figure out what's the best moment in time to get the ignition, because I haven't done the timing yet. So let's see if we can get the timing more or less right to begin with. So after a lot of rubbing, I actually found what I think a mark for cylinder number 1. And I'll show it to you in a few seconds. So let me put the spark plugs back, because we're going to try to crank it up in just a few seconds. So I actually started to scrub a bit on the side here and on the pulley, and I found this mark right here and a spot on the casing, and that just aligned with top dead center of the first cylinder. So I think this is the proper marking, and once that I had this in place, then I adjusted the magneto so that it more or less points to cylinder number 1 on the rotor. So I hope we are near, but maybe not. So I'm going to plug up the spark plugs as what we have found out, cylinder number 1, followed by cylinder number 3, and hopefully that is right, but so far I have no doubt. Then followed by number 2, which is to me a bit awkward, but okay, this should be cylinder number 2, and then finally to be followed by cylinder number 4. So guys, I have some bad news. I've been trying to crank up the engine a couple of times and I almost have no arms left. And the magneto is just not doing what it's supposed to do. the sparks that I see on the magneto are way too faint, and that's because of the magnet, the permanent magnet inside the magneto has lost its magnetism. So what I've done is I replaced the magneto, or I bypassed it with a ignition coil and the breakers. Let me show you what I've done. So I took the high tension lead off the magneto and I moved it to a high tension coil that I had laying around, and one side of the high tension coil, the positive side, is going to a battery, and the other side, which is the negative side, is then going to my breaker points inside the distributor. I also added up a condensator because you have to have that up, and now I'm having proper sparks. So I checked the gap, as you've seen. We checked also that the breaker points were clean. So now we should be able to crank it up, because I know I have a good spark because I actually double checked it. So now let's see if we can get it cranked up or not. I'm just gonna put the choke up, and I already have my battery connected. Yep. So now I can give that a try and try to swing it and see if it's gonna start or not. I need to fit it in properly. Alright, so I'm going to turn it around a couple of times. That is tough. That didn't want to do it. So I have my battery on. Everything should be connected right. So let's try one more time. Oh, it made some noise. So let's try that again. Okay. Almost. I think it's about to go. I'm not sure about the carburetor, but that's tough. Let's see. Let me put the choke fully up and block the carburetor and see if we can get it to turn. Because I could hear some kind of explosions already. I should fix that as well. No, that doesn't want to do it. It's not easy, yeah? Alright, let's try again. It's a good exercise. It still is not running very smoothly, but we'll have to fix a lot of things on this. All right. So, we got it to run, finally. Still a lot of adjustments, I guess, on the carburetor and the ignition itself, but at least it is running. So I will check out a few more things, and then maybe in the next video we'll see it running very smoothly, just like old Rusty. But I'm quite happy that the engine actually runs. So we have come to the end of this video, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and just give me the likes if you like it, or the thumbs down if you didn't like it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.